This morning, 2 decades after going to prison for the murder of his pregnant wife, Laci, Scott Peterson is breaking his silence.
I wish I could say I was stronger, but all that stuff did take a toll on me.
On Christmas Eve morning in 2002, a woman named Laci Peterson went missing from her home in Modesto, California. She was 8 months pregnant with a baby boy she and her husband had already named Connor. At first, people thought maybe she had gone for a walk. Maybe she had run to the store. Maybe something small had gone wrong. But as the hours passed, the day turned cold, the sun went down, and her family started to feel the first sharp edge of fear. Laci was not the kind of person who just disappeared. She was loved by everyone who knew her. She had a bright smile, a gentle voice, and a life that seemed full of hope. She was building a home, a family, and a future. That future never came. What followed was one of the most watched missing person cases in American history. It pulled in police, volunteers, reporters, and millions of strangers. And when the truth finally came out, it was harder than anyone wanted to believe. It was December 24th, 2002, and Modesto, California was getting ready for Christmas. The air was cool and crisp. People were last-minute shopping, wrapping gifts, and making plans for dinner. In the Peterson home on Covina Avenue, Laci Peterson was moving slowly. At 8 months pregnant, even simple tasks took longer. She had a round belly, tired legs, and a quiet excitement about the baby who would arrive soon. Laci was 27 years old. She had been married to Scott Peterson for 5 years. They had met in college, fallen in love, and built a life together in Modesto. Scott worked in sales. Laci had recently stopped working to get ready for the baby. Friends said she talked about Connor all the time. She had already set up the nursery. She had baby clothes folded neatly in drawers. That morning, neighbors saw Laci outside the house sometime before 10 a.m. She was walking her dog, a golden retriever named Mackenzie. She wore black pants and a white shirt. She waved to someone across the street. It looked like a normal morning. A little later, Scott left the house. He told people he was going fishing at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles away. He said he planned to be back by the afternoon. He took his boat, his fishing gear, and a cooler. Laci stayed home alone. Around 5 p.m., Scott called Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha. He sounded calm but confused. He said he couldn't reach Laci. He said he had just gotten home and she wasn't there. Her car was in the driveway. Her purse was inside. Mackenzie was in the yard, alone, with his leash still on. Sharon told him to call the police. Within minutes, the Modesto Police Department was on the case. Officers arrived at the Peterson home and began asking questions. Scott seemed worried. He said he didn't know where Laci could be. He said he had been fishing all day. But something about the situation didn't feel right. A pregnant woman doesn't just vanish on Christmas Eve without leaving a trace. The news spread fast. By nightfall, family and friends were searching the neighborhood. They walked streets, checked parks, looked behind bushes and in empty lots. Police brought in dogs. Helicopters flew overhead with searchlights. Volunteers showed up in coats and gloves carrying flashlights. Laci's family was heartbroken. Sharon Rocha stayed strong on the outside, but her eyes never stopped moving. Always looking, always hoping. Laci's stepfather, Ron Gransky, helped organize the search. Friends handed out flyers with Laci's photo, smiling, bright-eyed, holding her pregnant belly. Scott Peterson spoke to reporters outside the house. He looked tired. He said he loved Laci and wanted her home. He said he didn't understand what had happened, but some people watching noticed things that didn't sit well. Why had Scott gone fishing alone on Christmas Eve? Why didn't he seem more upset? Why had he waited hours to call Laci's family? Police asked Scott to come to the station and answer questions. He agreed. He said he had nothing to hide. Detectives listened carefully. Scott told them his story again and again. He said he left home around 9:30 a.m., drove to Berkeley, launched his boat, fished for a few hours, then drove home. He said he called Laci from his cell phone while he was out on the water, but she didn't answer. Police checked phone records. They checked his route. They checked the marina. And slowly they began to see gaps. In the days after Laci disappeared, the case became huge. Local news covered it every day. National news picked it up. People across the country followed the story. Candlelight vigils were held. Posters went up in stores and on telephone poles. Strangers prayed for Laci and her baby. Scott Peterson stayed in the public eye. He gave interviews. He helped with searches. He wore a button with Laci's photo. He talked about how much he missed her. But behind the scenes, police were growing more suspicious. They learned that Scott had been having an affair. Her name was Amber Frey. She was a massage therapist living in Fresno. She had no idea Scott was married. She had no idea his wife was pregnant. Scott had told her he was single. He had told her he was traveling for work. When Amber found out the truth, she went to the police. That changed everything. Detectives asked Amber to help. She agreed. She recorded phone calls with Scott. In those calls, Scott talked to her as if nothing was wrong. He didn't mention Laci was missing. He didn't mention the search. He acted like life was normal. To many people, that sounded cold. Too cold. Police now had a possible motive. They also had a man whose story had holes. And they had a growing feeling that Laci had not just wandered off. For weeks, there was no sign of Laci. Search teams covered miles of land. Divers searched lakes and rivers. Volunteers walked through fields and along roads. Police checked drains, ditches, and abandoned buildings. Every tip was followed. Every lead was chased. Laci's family kept hoping. They believed she was still alive. They believed someone had taken her and would bring her back. Scott kept showing up at search sites. He wore sunglasses a lot. He spoke softly. He thanked people for helping. But rumors were spreading. People in Modesto whispered that Scott didn't seem right. Some said he was too calm. Some said he was acting. Reporters started digging into his background. They talked to friends, co-workers, and neighbors. And then came another strange detail. Scott had bought a boat just weeks before Laci disappeared. He said he bought it to go fishing. He said it was something he had wanted for a long time. But police wondered why he bought it so close to Christmas. And why he chose to go fishing alone on Christmas Eve when most people were with family. The questions kept growing. On April 13th, 2003, almost 4 months after Laci vanished, a couple walking their dog near the shoreline of San Francisco Bay made a terrible discovery. They found a body. It was badly decomposed. The body was that of a late-term fetus, later identified as Connor Peterson. A day later, not far away, police found the body of an adult woman. It was Laci. The news hit Modesto like a shockwave. Laci's family had held on to hope for so long. Now that hope was gone. The search was over. What remained was grief, anger, and the demand for answers. Police moved quickly. They arrested Scott Peterson on April 18, 2003, in San Diego. He was found near the Mexican border with cash, camping gear, several changes of clothes, and his brother's ID. To many people, that looked like someone trying to run. Scott said he was just going on a trip. He said he had planned it for a long time, but the timing was hard to ignore. The case was no longer a missing person story. It was a murder case. Scott Peterson's trial began in June 2004 in Redwood City, California. It was moved from Modesto because of all the media attention. From the first day, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the seats. Cameras waited outside. People across the country watched every detail. The prosecution told a clear story. They said Scott Peterson killed Laci sometime around December 24th, 2002, either at home or somewhere nearby. They said he put her body in his boat and dumped it in San Francisco Bay. They said he did it because he wanted a different life, one without a pregnant wife, one with his new girlfriend. They pointed to the affair with Amber Frey. They played the recorded phone calls. They showed how Scott lied to her. They argued that he had been living a double life. They also focused on the boat. They said Scott bought it shortly before Laci disappeared. They said he made anchors from concrete weights and a boat cover. They said he knew the bay well enough to dump a body where it might not be found quickly. The defense told a different story. They said there was no proof Scott killed Laci. They said the bodies washed ashore by chance. They said the investigation was rushed and sloppy. They said police focused on Scott too early and ignored other possible suspects. They argued that someone else could have taken Laci while Scott was fishing. They said there was no clear cause of death. They said the case was built on guesswork, not facts. Day after day, witnesses took the stand. Amber Frey testified about her relationship with Scott. She told the court how he lied to her. She described how shocked she was when she learned the truth. Experts talked about tides, currents, and how bodies move in water. They talked about the condition of the remains. They talked about what could and could not be proven. Scott's family sat behind him in court. Laci's family sat on the other side. The room was heavy with emotion. Everyone wanted the truth. During the trial, certain pieces of evidence were discussed again and again. There was a boat. Police found it at the Berkeley Marina. They said tests showed small traces that could be linked to human remains, though the results were debated. The defense said the tests were not clear. There were the concrete anchors. Scott had made them himself. The prosecution said they were used to weigh down the bodies. The defense said he used them for fishing. There was Scott's behavior. The prosecution said his calmness, his affair, and his trip to the Mexican border showed guilt. The defense said people react to stress in different ways, and that going on a trip did not prove murder. There were the phone records. They showed Scott's calls and movements. The prosecution said the timeline did not fully match his story. The defense said small mistakes did not mean he was lying. And there was the biggest question of all: how and when did Laci die? Because there were no eyewitnesses, no clear murder scene, and no weapon found, the case depended a lot on what people believed about Scott's actions and choices. That made the trial intense. Both sides fought hard. Every detail mattered. On November 12, 2004, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the decision was read. Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Laci Peterson and second-degree murder for the death of Connor Peterson. Gasps filled the room. Some people cried. Laci's family held each other. Scott showed little emotion. A few months later, he was sentenced to death. For many people, the verdict brought a sense of justice. For others, it left questions. The case had been so public, so emotional, that it felt bigger than one courtroom. But the legal story did not end there. Over the years, Scott Peterson's lawyers filed appeals. They argued that he did not get a fair trial. They said there were problems with the jury selection, with how evidence was handled, and with media influence. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence, saying there were mistakes in the jury process. But the court upheld his murder convictions. Later, in 2021, he was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even now, more than 20 years later, the case of Laci Peterson still comes up. Documentaries have been made about it. People still talk about it online. Some believe Scott is guilty beyond any doubt. Others think the case had weak points and that the truth is not as simple as the verdict made it seem. New claims and theories sometimes appear, especially around old evidence or possible overlooked details. But none of that has changed the core facts. Laci and Connor are gone, and Scott Peterson is serving life in prison. What keeps people coming back to this story is not just the crime itself. It is the feeling that it could happen to anyone. A young couple, a baby on the way, a normal home in a quiet neighborhood, and then one morning, everything falls apart. It is also the way the case unfolded in public. People watched it day by day, like a long, painful movie that never stopped. They saw the searches, the interviews, the trial, the tears. They felt like they knew Laci, even if they had never met her. And that makes the loss feel personal. In all the talk about the trial and the evidence, it is easy to forget the most important part of this story. Laci Peterson was a real person. She was kind. She laughed easily. She loved animals. She loved her family. She was excited to be a mother. Friends remember her as someone who made people feel welcome. She had plans, dreams, and a future she was looking forward to. She didn't get the chance to meet her son. She didn't get the chance to celebrate Christmas with her family that year. She didn't get the chance to grow old. That is the real tragedy. The case became famous because of the mystery, the affair, the trial, and the media storm. But underneath all of that is a young woman whose life was taken and a baby who never got to take a breath. This story is not meant to teach a lesson or point a finger. It is simply what happened. A pregnant woman disappeared on Christmas Eve. A huge search followed. A relationship built on lies came to light. Bodies were found months later. A husband was arrested. A trial was held. A verdict was reached. A family was left with a loss that never fully heals. True crime stories like this stay with people because they are not neat. They do not come with easy answers. They show how quickly life can change, how trust can break, and how one person's choices can destroy many lives. The Peterson case also shows how public attention can shape a story. From the first day, people had opinions. Some believed Scott right away. Some defended him. Some changed their minds as more came out. The media played a big role, and that made everything louder, faster, and harder to sort out. But in the end, what matters most is Laci and Connor. Today, a memorial stands in Modesto to remember Laci and Connor Peterson. People still visit. They leave flowers. They say prayers. They remember a mother and a baby who should have been safe at home. Scott Peterson remains in prison. He has continued to say he is innocent. Courts have said otherwise. The story of Laci Peterson is not just a true crime case. It is a human story about love, loss, lies, and the search for truth. And for everyone who followed it, it is a reminder that behind every headline is a real family living through a nightmare they never asked for.